only about 1% or some really small number of elites in the South even held slaves. Most people didn't. And it was after the South was destroyed, you have to make sure that whites are soothed and brought back in to the country as well.
All right, Stanley, thank you. Now that we've gotten those 2 points out of the way, let's dive right into why we're here today. So let's talk about Reconstruction. What was Reconstruction? Can you just give me a background? What did it entail before you will talk about what the objectives and aims of Reconstruction was?
Well, basically, Reconstruction was literally what it was. After the Civil War, Lincoln specifically and the Republican Congress wanted to basically, reintegrate the South. And the way they wanted to reintegrate it was to take the newly freed slaves and integrate them into society. Just so you know, Lincoln himself had explored plans to basically ship all the freedmen out, back to Africa, to Haiti. There were exploratory plans to say, hey, blacks and whites can't live together. Let's send them back, to their motherlands or somewhere else. It wasn't feasible. Black people did not want to go. Many of them would say they were born here, Frederick Douglass including. So essentially what it was, Reconstruction was a plan to integrate slaves into the country politically, socially, all the ways, basically make them full citizens. It was also, and this part is forgotten, it was also to integrate the common Southerner. Only about 1% or some really small number of elites in the South even held slaves. Most people didn't. And it was after the South was destroyed, you have to make sure that whites are soothed and brought back in to the country as well. So basically it was a project to put everything back together again, but differently. It was build back better again, to use a phrase.
So in essence, it was like a twofold thing. One, to integrate the freed slaves into US society. The second point was to reintegrate the South itself, which had tried to secede during the Civil War, back into US society. So now,
but better in that the goal was to have blacks voting, 15th Amendment, basically 14th Amendment. Hey, that the Dred Scott decision basically said that blacks, even free blacks, were not citizens. They had no rights that we were bound to respect, mainly because we don't consider them citizens. So the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment was voting, black males. 14th Amendment was, hey, that's where birthright citizenship came from. Essentially, hey, if you were a slave and you were born in this country, you are a citizen. So that was the 14th Amendment. And then, essentially the 14th Amendment also made sure that all citizens were treated equally. And then the 13th Amendment, of course, was banning slavery except for people incarcerated or crimes.
So that to me was pretty progressive for its time. I mean, granting citizenship to everyone born in the US and granting equal rights. Now, I know that fell off along the way, but how were they, apart from passing certain laws and amendments, what were some of the specific things that were outlined to be done during construction for Black people? For example, the 40 acres and a mole thing, how was it supposed to be implemented? What were some of those things that were supposed to be done?
Well, I forget, it was General Order number 15 or something. When Sherman marched through Georgia, he wound up in Savannah, which is, by the way, where I am today. I'm visiting family. I'm from Savannah. But essentially, General Sherman, met with local, Black leaders in Savannah. And he basically said, hey, what do y'all need? And, 40 acres and a mule was devised. And he issued a general order saying, hey, Black people, this is what we're going to do for you. And it wound up getting struck down by whoever the Secretary of War was. I want to say it was Stanton, but I don't think that's correct. The other thing that is interesting is not too far from Savannah, probably 50 miles away, Sea Islands of South Carolina. There was a whole scheme to take land that had either been abandoned by whites or confiscated, divvy it up into parcels of land, and basically have former slaves farm that land. And funny enough, it wound up being kind of railroaded in that land speculators from the north came down and basically took control of the land, even though the government was behind divvying that land out. So essentially, it was realized that, hey, for Black people to succeed, they're going to have land. You know, they're going to have some tangible assets in order to either feed themselves or produce crops that they can sell at market and make a living. So 40 acres and a mule, basically, that went away. It was struck down by whoever the Secretary of War was. I'll have to look it up right quick. And the scheme, and I can't even remember the name of the scheme, over in South Carolina, basically, I don't know how to describe it. It was just kind of taken over by land speculators. And at some point, the people who, the original owners of that land, wound up saying, hey, it's our land, give it back to us. And essentially, property rights won out. These white people own the land, speculated, and bought land from the government. And the property, very few Blacks were in a position to purchase the land outright. A lot of it was just rented or kind of like, here, farm this, and there's a scheme, maybe you can own it later. The whole thing just fell apart. The 40 acres and a mule and other types of programs were attempted, but it just didn't take. White people weren't having it.